the kind of solutions we provide. So if you look at the sheet, there's a lot of different things. These are more in terms of horizontal offerings like qualitative, quantitative research, in-depth senior level primary interviews, and multilingual coverage across Asia Pacific and Europe. There are some customers for whom we do a lot of news monitoring, trend tracking, even financial research, competitor profiles. And then there's a lot of work that we do which is around helping our customers do business in India. Could be India entry, acquisition, due diligence. So this is a sort of quick overview of some of the services that we provide and which pretty much spans the research value chain. Coming to something a little more closer to comparative intelligence, we have done a lot of CI projects, very focused on the Indian market, maybe about 100 projects in the last 5 years, ranging across a few different types of studies. This is really customized to the need of the customer, depending on whether they want to understand a market, understand the competition, understand supply chain, or do an acquisition. So they're very different, very focused studies built around trying to help our customers make better decisions. So you can see a few examples on the screen. I'd be happy to talk more about this, but I think we're all waiting for the real seminar. I'd just like to end this slide by saying that most of our studies are very focused on helping customers make decisions. That's really what we are here for. In terms of recognition, why should you believe us? Our research has been quoted extensively in the international media, in newspapers like Wall Street Journal, Economist, New York Times, Financial Times, in the Economic Times in India, Financial Express, Mint. We've even been quoted in Forbes magazine, Time magazine. We've got a few awards recognizing us as a very respectable research company. From the Black Book of Outsourcing, NASSCOM has also ranked us amongst 50 emerging companies in 2009. Both Varsha and I have presented at several SKIP conferences, most recently in Orlando, but over the last few years at the US conference, at the European conference, and at the Latin American conference. So our research is reasonably well regarded. We have received a lot of peer recognition. That's it for the introduction. I don't want to go on talking about this. If any of you have questions, feel free to send them in.
Thank you, Arun. I'll now go straight into the meat of our webinar and our topic today. So we'll start by looking at what kind of data Indian analysts typically work with. We have done a webinar a few months back in which we had discussed competitive intelligence in fragmented and undocumented and unorganized markets. And here we had established that business activity in India is largely underdocumented. There are several reasons for this. The unorganized sector in India is very large. It accounts for 90% of the workforce and 60% of the country's GDP. About 80% of enterprises in India are not even registered. In certain product categories, there exists a very large grey market, again, which is not documented. there is a high degree of fragmentation in the industry, and what that means is there's a very large number of small enterprises, again, which are not always documented. Additionally, India is a very diverse market in terms of income differentials, urban-rural divide, a large variety of languages, cultures, different regulations in different states, and differentials in the economic development across the states. Due to all of these factors, the statistical machinery in India is very overburdened, and hence there's less data available. Industry associations also, with just a few exceptions, are not very strong and don't have their own data. The market for information and research is really nascent, so there's not enough research and data being bought and sold. There are a few pockets, of course, where the level of documentation is high, but by and large, there's very little secondary data that CI analysts can really work with. So this lack of reliable data is a huge handicap for businesses in India. In the 1990s, soon after the economic liberalization and reforms and stuff, there was a lot of hype about the size of the market, the size of middle class, and though there was no hard data available, everyone thought it was a huge market, and many companies across sectors entered the market with very ambitious growth plans, and many of them failed. All this was really based on flimsy evidence, on just some hype. So in many sectors, even today, businesses base plans on very flimsy evidence. So there's an acute need for reliable data. So how does one recognize reliable data? So in order to understand this, we need to figure out what are the sources that are typically used and how reliable are they. And if they are not reliable, how do we use them and still get reliable intelligence out of it? Since there's very little published information available, researchers rely a lot on primary research. So instead of hard statistics and facts, they need to estimate the numbers on which they use, and these estimates are based on assumptions. So the quality of primary research, basis for assumptions and estimation technology, all of these need to be very robust so that the conclusions that we arrive at the end of it are reliable. So here is what a typical research process may really look like. You start with collection of data from primary and secondary sources. Then you validate the data and make some assumptions about the market or the industry. Then you use these assumptions in order to estimate the numbers that you really need. Finally, you need to do some reality check on these estimates that you have arrived at, and you do that through triangulation. And we'll come to triangulation in the sections following this. When you are satisfied with the estimates that you have, then you use these in order to come to some actionable conclusions for your business. So let's see now what you can get from secondary data. Secondary data we've already established is very scant. It is most often, secondary sources are most often used for generating lists of companies, of respondents for doing research. Some basic macroeconomic data, industry data, demographic data and trends, all these are available from government sources, and they serve as a good starting point for research. Financials and other operational details of the companies can be found from secondary sources. Of course, they are more listed and very little for unlisted companies. And then finally, there is some published research available on select industry sectors. So all of that can be had from secondary sources. Starting with government sources, in general, they are quite reliable. But as discussed before, the coverage is not adequate and the depth and comprehensiveness is also not adequate. So there are some areas where there is a lot of data. For example, most regulators make a lot of information available to their website on the domains in which they cover. For some industry departments, there's a lot of data available. For example, some time back, we were trying to analyze the potential of low-budget airlines in India and how much of the railway passenger traffic for long-distance travel can they grab. And we found that the Rail Ministry has the most detailed month-wise data on the number of passengers carried by distance, by geography, by fare type, by class, and so on. So this was extremely useful. We have found that data from some government sources, particularly local and state government sources, is not totally reliable. It needs to be validated. On occasion, we found that the numbers from, say, the EXIM data, or the export-import data, that is, has been incorrect. So, they look like they are possibly data entry errors in their data. In another case with the state government, we found that in the month-wise sales figures for a particular item, the opening amount for a month did not tally with the closing amount for the previous month. So what we then did is we asked for annual information, and then we tried to figure out from the annual data which of the monthly figures really were right. So it seemed like there was a data entry error. So it is possible to spot such errors if the analysts are alert. So validation can be done by looking at the same data for different periods or from different government publications, or also doing some common sense checks on the numbers based on industry information available from other external sources. So if you are looking, for example, if you are looking at a data over a period of time, you can watch for sudden changes or sudden blips in the values. And if you find there is no logical explanation for this, then you know that there could be some error there and you need to validate it. But by and large, you can consider government sources as being fairly reliable. Going on to non-government sources of data, there are some academic institutions that undertake some good research, good business economic research that is relevant to business in India. Some of these include NCAER, ICRIER, the NICFT, and they sometimes actually do their own primary data collection as well. Or they use government data for their research. Now, some of this government data is not really available to us. We don't even know it exists, but they find the access to it. Most of their research and data is quite reliable, and the estimates that they provide are based on fairly rigorous methodology. So, in the absence of any other hard data, these estimates can be used for analysis. Industry associations, not all industries have them. There are very few strong ones like the NASSCOM, ACMA, COAI, Alcoma. There is a machine tool manufacturers association and so on. The problem with most of these associations is that membership is quite low and consists mainly of large organized players. So their data is also limited to the organized sector. Nevertheless, they do provide member names, contact details, which can all be used for generating lists for primary research. Only a handful of these associations publish their own reports and data. Some consultants like Ernst & Young, PwC, and advisors, some other advisories as well, they publish some good research of their own. There are also some other private sector research publishers like ICRA, ICRA, CRISIL. There are databases like CMI, Capital Line, ISI, Emerging Markets, and so on. The coverage, of course, is not very wide, but you can have access to them, and they are fairly reliable. There are some trade journals also, like Paint India or Chemical Weekly or TV Vyopar. They publish industry insights and data. Then there are some online portals like DQ India, Biospectrum, CIOL. So data from all these sources is not comprehensive, but whatever is available is fairly reliable. Coming on to trade directories like IndiaMart, Gymtrade, and yellow pages like Just Dial or yellow pages Sulekha.com. These are great places to dig out names of enterprises in the unorganized sector from both large and small towns in India. But the information listed here needs to be validated. Like we found phone numbers are incorrect or the categories are incorrect. For example, companies that are listed as manufacturers are often actually only traders or distributors or dealers. News sites, they are a good starting point for research. but they almost always need to be validated. For example, on one occasion we found in one news item a particular company in 2007, we found that the news had quoted their employee number as being 2000. Every article after that came in the newspapers quoted the same number. We had 2,000 employees. And when finally we actually got a chance to do primary research on the company, we found that it was actually only 1,500. So news portals are a good starting point, but need validation. Social media in India is not as extensively used as in developed economies. Nevertheless, there are some websites that do provide some useful content, and we've got some interesting leads for our research from some discussion forums as well. For example, on one discussion forum, some employees of a BPO were complaining about the increment they had got in that particular quarter. And during their discussions, they actually discussed and revealed revenues and profitability of different locations of that BPO. Now, this is data that we would never have found elsewhere. And even though it was not really validated data, it gave us a very good starting point. We also find LinkedIn and Facebook are great for identifying respondents in primary research. Job sites are another great source of information. Some of the CVs have a lot of information on companies in which the candidates have worked in the past. However, in general, social media needs to be intensively validated. Coming on to primary research, most of the value in studies done in India comes from primary research, because that is where you get the meat of the insight. In order to do reliable primary research, you have to spread across a lot of types of respondents. You need various types of respondents. The various types of respondents you can use are customers, suppliers, distributors, dealers, government agencies, employees, ex-employees, competitors, and so on. Indian respondents in general are very loquacious, but this is really a double-edged sword, because if the respondent is knowledgeable, whatever he tells you will be very valuable. But if he or she is not knowledgeable, it's likely that they'll still give an opinion on the question that you ask, and it will be quite difficult to figure out whether to take them seriously or not. So the first step is really to choose the right respondent. So if you want reliable data, you ask each person only what she is likely to know. So recruitment consultants may not be able to tell you about the company strategy, but they will definitely know what skill sets the company is hiring. Within a company, you need to get to the right person in the right function. For example, we found that people from the finance function often have the correct numbers on their fingertips. But if you go to the sales and marketing people for numbers, you'll find that they tend to exaggerate employee numbers, revenue, capabilities, market shares, and so on. But they have a good grip on trends, industry dynamics, and other such information. As far as level is concerned, senior employees are better able to give you a macro perspective and industry insights, which the junior or the middle level people may not have. But if you want operational details, it's better to go to middle and junior level employees. For validating data points, we found that even security guards and receptionists are quite valuable. Senior level people sometimes tend to fit about capabilities. So once we found that a senior person in a BPO told us they had capabilities for all languages. But when we went to the operations person at the middle level, we realized it was really only 2 languages they did, and they were planning to do other languages going forward. Coming to approach, we found that if you are able to approach a respondent to someone they know or someone known to you, then they are not only more willing to talk to you, but they also give you more reliable information. So it's important to approach the respondents in a non-threatening way. So if you ask them for specific information, it can be threatening. Like if you ask the salesperson, what is your sales target? That he could feel threatened by that. But you need to, so you can weave it into a broader discussion about the company's plans, the company's targets. Language also plays an important role in getting reliable research. So in India, it's easier to build a rapport with the respondents if you speak to them in a language in which they are comfortable. So in general, we found that if you want to speak to middle and junior level employees, say particularly in the manufacturing sector, it's better to just speak in a local language. Also for trade contacts, often local languages work better. Next, knowledgeable interviewers or analysts are also better able to get reliable data because they are able to probe and cross-question the respondent on whatever responses they are getting. So they get better insights, and also they can identify responses or respondents that are slightly shaky because they themselves have a good knowledge of the industry. Finally, body language in face-to-face interviews or voice tone in telephonic interviews can tell you whether the respondent is getting uncomfortable or with whatever answers they are giving. But this, of course, you need to be a little bit experienced to be able to read and recognize these verbal cues. Next, we'll go on to discuss how can you really validate when it comes to you've got this information, some of it is reliable, some of it needs validation. So how do you go about validating and then finally triangulating your findings? Validation really needs to be an intrinsic part of research methodology in India. Most research methodologies use a combination of primary and secondary research to get reliable results so that you can cross-check one against the other. So the secondary research can give you, it creates the ground, it gives you some basic information, and primary research fills in the gaps and provides rich insights into whatever research you're doing. So in the Indian context, since key inputs and insights come from primary research, we need to ensure that the sample size and the coverage is large enough to ensure that the information is verified by multiple respondents. Further, when doing primary research in India, we find that discussion guides work much better than questionnaires. With questionnaires, the interviewers tend to stick to the script, whereas with discussion guides, the interviewer can mentally cross-check the responses against what they've heard from other respondents and accordingly they can probe. And this is generally what is required to get reliable information. So all the pieces of the jigsaw must fit in with each other. And if you have an odd piece, you need to figure out where it belongs or you need to question it and validate and verify it. So discussion guides work much better. Discussion guides themselves can have many questions which establish many coordinates for the same parameters. So you can ask the same thing in many different ways within the discussion guide. This way, within the interview, the information gets validated. For example, we found that if you have a question on growth rate, it must always be followed with a question on why the particular growth rate. So if someone says 15% growth rate, why 15%? Why not 20%? Why not 10%? So in one such study we did on microprinters, we had a similar question on growth rate. And we found that the why question really helped because the companies were able to tell us, give us answers like, oh, because of the UID project of the government, we expect the growth rate to be so much. Or they were able to list some key orders that they had got on the basis of which they had estimated their growth rate. In the earlier discussion, as we discussed, a knowledgeable interviewer can elicit reliable data, and so good knowledge sharing within the team during the project can improve reliability. So if 2-3 different people have found different bits of information, if all analysts are aware of it, they are able to do validation much better. Finally, it is possible that when you are doing research, a large number of respondents give you one view, and then one or two respondents who you think are reliable give you a totally different view. So what do you do in such cases? So in such cases, you can go back to the respondents and you can confirm our understanding, or you can ask them why they think their views differ from those of the others. And we found that this technique kind of brings out new insights that that you sometimes missed out when you first talk to them. Assumptions. Assumptions are a key part in estimation. Market size, company revenues, number of employees, industry growth rates, etc. They all need to be estimated because you don't have hard numbers. So these estimates are based on certain assumptions, and assumptions are actually basically thumb rules that you use or that you identify for using information from a sample and applying it to your entire universe. For example, you can find the ratio of population to say the number of beauty salons in sample cities and then apply this ratio to the rest of the country to estimate what is the total number of beauty salons in the country as a whole. So key here, of course, is to find the right correlation. So is the number of beauty salons related to the population, or is it related to income, or is it related to the level of urbanization or the level of education or whatever? If you use the wrong correlation, you will get inaccurate results. And how do you establish this correlation? You do it through research. You do research to establish the correlation and then you quantify the thumb rule. So say your thumb rule would be number of salons per 1,000 population. This kind of quantification you can arrive at through surveys of samples at different locations and so on. So it's easy to see why reliable assumptions are required while doing estimation. Coming to triangulation. Triangulation entails looking at the same problem or phenomena in different ways or approaching it from different sides to see if the answers we get, if they converge. So each strategy we choose will have some margin of error or some weakness or shortcoming. But when you take multiple strategies, you overcome these shortcomings and ensure that the errors are counterbalanced. So the process of merging the findings involves creativity, it involves judgment, wisdom, insight, and so on. So the objective of triangulation is really to validate our approach to the problem and also discover new aspects that may have been missed. We get greater confidence in our findings if we've got the finding from in multiple different ways. And finally, if we get different answers from different approaches, then you know you've missed something and you need to re-examine that phenomenon. So how can you really do triangulation? So most commonly triangulation can be done in two ways. One is through data triangulation and secondly is through methodology triangulation. So data triangulation involves taking data samples at different times in different places or from different people. Here is an example. We needed to estimate the advertising spend on scientific jobs in India. So what we did is we monitored relevant scientific jobs for a period of 3 months across various publications, websites, and so on. And we calculated the ad spend of these using some standard ad rates for these publications. This we extrapolated for the entire year. Since we've taken the sample, since we monitored it for 3 months, we extrapolated it for the year to find the annual job spend. But we ran a risk here. The risk was that what if the job spend is seasonal? So in order to triangulate our estimate, we needed to take samples at different times in the year later on to see that, to check whether they were okay or not. Similarly, you can take different geographical samples or different demographic segments to triangulate your findings. Most times, data triangulation is built into the design of the research itself. So the study design involves sampling across geographies, demographics, time periods, and so on. Another way to triangulate is by adopting different methodologies. So you can check your qualitative findings with your quantitative findings, or if you are estimating market size, you can do a demand side estimation where you add the total consumption of a particular product or service, and then do supply side estimation. So you add the total production of that product or service and then you compare the two. Another way to triangulate market size of a particular product, if you look at the size of one of the raw materials that are going into the production of the product, or you look at the size of the final product that is being made from this product. For example, very often to estimate the turnover of an IT company, you can use employee numbers and some assumed average revenue per employee. Similarly, if you are trying to say market size sugar in India, the sugar production in India, this can be triangulated using the production of the sugarcane in the country and making some suitable assumptions about the percentage of it that is used, that goes into making sugar and what the conversion rate is and so on. So the case studies that now follow will actually further illustrate our validation and triangulation technique. And I'll hand over to Arun to take you through those case studies.
Thank you, Varsha. I think Varsha has given a lot of information about how to ensure that you have reliable data, how to triangulate. I'm actually going to now take a couple of concrete examples and try and explain how we went about these studies and the specific steps we took to ensure the reliability of our findings. So the first case study I'm going to talk about, we had to estimate the market size for clinical and diagnostic laboratories in India. Now, if you look at this industry, it's like most other businesses in India, highly disorganized. There are very few large national players, but hundreds, really, not hundreds, but thousands of small labs all over the country, and very difficult to get a sense of how many there are, what their revenues might be, and things like that. So when we were given this problem, we thought of trying to establish the market size by using at least 3 different approaches. So the first approach was, can we build this up bottom up? Okay. How we did this was like this. We took the top 6,000 cities in India and divided them into different groups based on population and demographics. So like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and group these cities into fairly, homogeneous sets. Then for all these cities, based on some sampling in selected cities, we tried to estimate the number of labs and then extrapolated this across the country. Now there was as expected, there'd be a wide range, and we actually got a number between say 100,000 and 140,000 labs in India, of which 90% of them were run by unorganized sector players. We then, using primary research and talking to labs, we classified all these labs into 5 different categories based on the number of tests, the pricing, and the nature of the laboratory. We then found out average prices of different tests, the number of tests each laboratory did, and we could arrive at an average revenue per lab in each category, in each city. And then we added this up, multiplied it by the number of labs, and we arrived at an estimated market size. So this is one approach with a largely, primary-led approach where we went into samples, collected data, related it to number of cities, and so on. The second approach was a top-down approach, which was a little bit different. Here what we did is we found the annual expenditure on healthcare as a percentage of GDP. This is published in various economic surveys and government data. We then looked at the size of the clinical and diagnostic market as a percentage of healthcare expenses. This was also available in some published sources, and we also did some primary interviews with experts to verify this number. So we got a second estimate. The third estimate was really we spoke to industry experts, leading laboratories, people in the healthcare establishment, and tried to get different numbers from them. So we got 3 different estimates, and we found actually that they were all pretty close. We were able to, from these, determine that the number of labs was not 100,000 or 140,000, but approximately 120,000. And we were able to triangulate and present to our client a fairly good set of numbers which we were pretty confident of, and we could even demonstrate showing the different data points, showing the different assumptions, how we had calculated this. Right? So this is how you ensure reliability. This is kind of one approach. Some of the steps we took in while validating this, we listed some of the sources. So healthcare expenditure came from WHO, World Health Report, Indian government. We cross-checked this with industry experts. Again, the share of diagnostics to healthcare, we got some published reports, but again cross-checked this with industry experts. Number of labs we got from NABL, verified from industry experts in different cities. Did some of our own sampling there as well. The classification into categories by number of tests we did through primary interviews, talking to some industry experts, validated this by talking to a whole lot of different people, average prices, volumes of tests in each category, mainly primary, average revenue of lab, primary. So you can see that when we actually designed this study, for every piece of information, we had to work out how it's going to tie together and how we're going to get multiple numbers. So that if any one of them is wrong, it raises a red flag, we go back and verify. So, intelligent sampling is important for reliability. The second case study is we had to estimate the domestic revenues for an international ERP solution provider in India. Now, this was a little tricky because this company was selling ERP products and education services in the Indian market, but a lot of their revenues came from export of IT services. So they had a large staff here doing programming and other jobs for their parent company. And our client didn't want these numbers. They wanted only domestic sales of their products. Though it was a listed company, India numbers were not easy to get. Right? So we approached this again in 2 different ways. One was a top-down approach, and the other was a bottom-up approach. I'll explain this. So the first was we looked at what are the global sales of the company. This is available in their annual report and SEC filings. In those reports, we were able to find out what is the share of Asia Pacific. We were able to get some idea of overall India sales. This happened through some primary research as well. But still the India sales included the software development for exports. Then we actually spoke to salespeople and tried to get sales figures in terms of what was being exported. This we did by actually trying to build headcounts of how many people were involved in the services exports business. Using this, we were able to arrive at what would be the likely revenues in terms of exports. By deducting this from India sales, we were able to get a good number for what would be the product sales locally. So this was one estimate. The second thing was more bottom-up, where we said, let's try and find out from distributors, from salespeople, and a bunch of different people in the field, in the industry, what might be the sales. Now we found that, as always, getting sales figures is very, very challenging. So we took a slightly different approach. We said, let's try and find out what the targets are. This was a lot easier to get because regional targets, east, west, north, south, were fairly well known in the amongst channels, distributors, sales people. We were able to get this by region, and then we were able to, through primary, try to understand how much of the targets were actually being met in each region. Using these two together, we were able to get some idea of the market size. And we found that actually both the estimates converged. They were quite close to each other. We went back with these estimates, again validated it with some experts, and we were able to put a final number together. So again here I've listed some of the steps and the ways we validated. Here almost everything was primary research. Apart from global sales and Asia Pacific sales, nothing else was available in published form, and we actually had to interview many different types of respondents at different levels. And as Varsha mentioned earlier, for people at different levels, there were different sets of questions. We actually managed to get totally different data points from different people and use them to validate each other. So this is the end of the case study. I'll just summarize our talk a little bit. How do you recognize reliable data? The first thing is it a fact or is it an estimate? If it's a fact, what is the source of data? Has it been validated? How reliable is that source? But more often than not, especially in business, you actually have estimates, right? And it's crucial to understand what assumptions these are based on. Very often in the media and the news and in other research that you read, you will find numbers. Very rarely they'll tell you how they've arrived at the numbers. And this is sort of the biggest area where you can go wrong. Simple things. Sometimes people classify the same industry in different fashions. You don't know what they're counting. And this is a very common problem. How have they done the research? Have they validated these numbers? Have they triangulated? Have they just simply extrapolated some previous data? So it's very important to question all of this. Research is a funny business. So it's a good idea for an analyst always to be skeptical. Question every number. In doing so, think about how you might verify this, how might you validate this, build all this into the research methodology. Look behind the scenes. How did people arrive at that number? How can I get a totally different source or multiple sources ideally to give me a different perspective? So that's it for now. I think we've spoken quite a lot. There's some questions. I think there are lots of questions, and we'd be happy to answer them. I'll hand it back to Varsha to manage the question and answer session.
Thank you, Arun. We have a few questions here. I'm going to start. I'm going to start from the beginning. I have a few people, Anjit, Rostik, and Bharti, have asked whether this presentation will be made available. The answer is yes. We will put a recording of this entire webinar. This will be an audio recording as well as an audio video recording. We'll put it up on our website and we'll make the URL up. We'll send the URL to all of you who have attended the webinar, and you can come back and look through the recording. Also, a PDF version of the actual presentation will be available from our website, and we'll make the URL to that available to you too. We have a question here. We have a question here from...
The question from Rostik Kirsty. How much reliable data can an individual from Canada obtain without much primary research in India? Could you suggest any databases or possible sources of information that are considered reliable to gather secondary research? There are a few. I think if you can tell us what type of information you want, we might be able to point you towards some reliable published sources. If you send Varsha or me a mail, we'll be happy to share with you the likely sources.
We have one more question. Harish Kumar wants to add that words can be a very good source of information that can be relied upon. The information in Hoovers is limited, but yes, whatever is available is reliable. I agree with that. We have a question on where can we get financial data when the company is privately held. Vanita asks this. Vanita, you can refer to the Registrar of Companies website, the ROC website, and financial sprawl private limited companies are now available online at the website. The P&L statement is not made public; it is not available, but you can get balance sheets and you can get some other reports like the director's report, the shareholding pattern, and so on for all privately held companies. If you want P&L data, that you have to seek from by doing primary research.
So there's another question from Tina Chimalapati. What if time is a constraint for primary research? And what would be the key parameters that you would not compromise on? This is a tricky one. I think primary research, we all know, takes a fair amount of time because many days, sometimes weeks before you can get the interview or get the right person to agree to talk to you. So you can't really, if you have time as a constraint, it becomes difficult. However, if you have good contacts in the industry and are well networked, you can probably do it pretty fast. What would be the key parameters that you would not compromise on? I think the key thing that you have to look at is the reliability of the respondent. How knowledgeable is he? Does he really know what he's talking about, he or she? Can you rely on the insights or the numbers? So even if you have less time and you have to do fewer interviews, it's really important to then pick the people most likely to have good insights.
We have a question here from Premjit. He asks, is road traffic data available with government departments? How accessible and reliable is this data? And do you have experience in this area? Premjit, road traffic data, actually any data, if the government is collecting the data, it is possible to get access to it. So the first thing to determine is whether the government is collecting data. I doubt the government is collecting road traffic data on a regular basis, but it's possible that the traffic police department in various cities at various times may have done some sort of surveys, may have collected data in order to regulate traffic, in order to make decisions on signals versus circles and so on. So if at all they have collected some data in the past, and if we can establish, we'll have to do some primary research to establish if they've collected this data at any point, and if they have, then it is possible to get access to it through the relevant government department. And now RTI has made it possible for us to ask for whatever data they have. But there's lots of data in India that the government simply does not collect, and actually road traffic data is probably one such thing. So I hope that answers your question.
There's another question from Sohan Srivastav. Where can I get data of growth of various verticals across geography? This is a rather broad question. I think for every industry or vertical, there are either specialist publications on the net or specialist research companies which provide data internationally. You can also look at different sources, the UN, different countries. It's all over. There's data, lots of data. I think if you know what you're looking for, we can help you.
Okay. Vikas has asked a question on the generator rental market. Do we have a case study on it, or do we have something that touches base with equipment rental in India? We don't actually have a direct case study on equipment rental, but because it is possible to develop a methodology in order to estimate the equipment rental market, and if you send us an email, we'll be happy to discuss this with you offline. Coming on to the next question, just give us a minute.
There's a question from Beverly Batija that does ValueNotes do similar studies across countries, South Africa, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. We do actually do studies across countries. Pakistan has been a little bit difficult because we haven't been able to get good partners there. So we're open to looking at this. We've done work in Indonesia, China, across Asia Pacific, Europe, and the Middle East. So yes, we can do this. It really depends on what kind of information you're looking at there. That's something we can do. If you send us a mail, we'll be happy to talk to you about that.
Gunjan has a question the question is, while doing primary collection, how do we ensure that the information is ethically collected and that the source is not bound by any contract not to share that information? Gunjan, there are certain, there is a code of ethics actually for competitive intelligence. The key pillars of this code, firstly, whatever is illegal is not ethical. I think that's very obvious. So you can't collect information through illegal means. You can't put a gun to somebody's head and ask for information. You can't pay bribes in order to get information from primary sources. The second thing is misrepresentation is not okay. So you can't go as somebody else in order to collect information. You can't say, I'm a recruitment consultant, so tell me your salary. Or you can't say, I'm a student doing my thesis, so give me information. Or any such thing. Or I'm offering you a job, so give me information. So misrepresentation is not okay. Any conflict of interest one must avoid. So within these bounds, and actually when you approach a source, there is nothing unethical about asking. You can ask anybody what you like. Now, whether they choose to give you the answer or not is entirely their choice. Many times you can tell the respondent, you don't have to tell me confidential information. Whatever you can tell me, I'm happy to listen to. I mean, you can tell me whatever you can share. So essentially, you can do primary research ethically.
There's another question from Gaurav. We recruit interviewers, we get MBA freshers, etc. What are training available in India to train interviewers? Because CI interviewers need to have different skills from interviewers who run a set of closed-end questions. This is a good question because we haven't found anybody providing high-quality training for competitive intelligence. And in fact, we have been providing training to some of our customers, and very shortly we will be doing more sort of open training sessions where people can sign on. If you're interested, please send us a mail and we'll be happy to talk to you about it.
We're just looking at the next question.
There's one, do you know if international data sources like IMF, Thomson One, etc. are reliable for India data, or do they also rely on new sources? I think this is a very difficult question. It really depends on the specific data. They do rely on Indian sources, but I think most of these international databases are quite particular in terms of who they choose as their partners. They pretty much have good partners.
What is the best approach? Rupesh asks, what is the best approach to estimate global market size for catalyst refining and petrochemical industry? Do you have a case study on this? What's your experience on this? Rupesh, we don't have a case study on this. And offhand, off the top of my head, it is difficult to formulate a methodology, but I'll be happy to discuss this with you offline and we can figure out ways in which you can best approach this problem. I'm going to take a final question because we are out of time now. The final question is from Gaurav. He says, what industry training and certifications are available in CI market for professionals?
Right now in India there isn't, as I said, much training. There are a couple of institutes like Amity which does an MBA program, but they have very few students. There are no other industry training. As I said, we are planning to start some training in September. So please get in touch with us.
We are already doing custom training, but some training programs that are open to everyone will be starting in September, and if anybody is interested, you can get in touch with us regarding those. We have run out of time. Thank you all for attending, and I hope you enjoyed the webinar. If you have any feedback, we would really like to know. We'll send you a feedback form in a couple of days. In the same email, we'll also send you the URLs, as I said before, URLs for accessing the recording of this webinar, and also in case you want to download PDF. In case we've missed any questions due to lack of time, we'll be happy to answer any emails you send us. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, and I think there have been a few questions that we haven't been able to answer because of lack of time. There's really been a great response and a lot of questions. So, we'll be happy to take these offline if you send us a mail, and hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.